So the objective for our conversation today is going to be to find solutions to problems that are common to all of you as you're dealing with the callers that you're trying to coach. And before we got started, one of the issues that came up was running out of breath. A person gets nervous and they can't keep their breath going. So there are two solutions to that one that I think can be very easily taught and easily monitored. One of them is just to use your hands, and I did this earlier this morning. I don't think any of you were here, you saw the effect of that and how it was readily possible to double the length of time that a person had to sing. Will all of you stand up, and I'll actually bring you through this process so that you can then feel how it works in your bodies. We won't use the straw right now, but that's going to come in a minute. When you're trying to get a person's singing voice to work in an optimal way, there are two parts of the system that have to be attended to. One of them is the process by which you breathe, and the other one is the process by which you make sound. And so we're going to start with the breathing activity, and after the breathing activity, then we're going to concentrate on the sound production activity. So right off the bat, I'm going to demonstrate for you. I'm trying to get a place where everybody can see readily. All right, so wait, I got a knife. If I go here, you can sort of see what's going on, right? So I'm going to use my hand, and I'm going to inscribe an oval in front of my body. My hand, as it goes downward, represents the process of my... let me start that again. When my hand goes down and away and around and out, that's the process of inhaling. So here's the inhalation. It's a little bit like filling up a water balloon. You fill it up at the bottom, and then it fills to the top. And that's what the hand is supposed to represent. So out and away, and then it reaches about the top of your clavicles, right up the top of your chest. Then your hand turns over, and then as you exhale, your hand moves downward toward your navel and below, and it's as if you're pushing down with your hand, and the air were going out. And that's an exact backwards image for most people. For most people, the image is to contract and drive their breath out. But if you can set up the pattern where they are pushing down with their hand at the time that they're breathing out, it will retard the behavior of their diaphragm and help them to gain better breath control. Will you join me in that process? So as you start out, your hand is turned into cupping shape, and you draw it away from you and up towards your clavicles. Okay, so, and then, and this becomes a continuing oval. You'll notice that there's just the slightest pause at the bottom as your hand turns over, and there's just the slightest pause at the top as you go from the inhaling system to the exhaling system. But quite apart from that, it's a very restful activity. Very good. It's a very restful activity, and it's a very quieting activity. So if you're dealing with somebody that's got nerves, this is an excellent way to give them something to do to help calm their nerves. Now, there's another thing that's associated with that. You notice the cadential nature of that? It's like the waves on the seashore. They roll in, they roll out. They roll in, and they roll out. And there's like a natural cadence in your body that when you give it permission, it will find its own rhythm, and it doesn't have to fight with itself, and it doesn't require any intellectual attention. Yes, that can vary at will. And as a matter of fact, in just a minute, you're going to see how this will start to change. But initially, you want to go slowly to just let them find that natural, easy, quiet, at rest breathing. Now, the next thing that I want to show you is that as you get that fullness of breath right up at the top of the arc of your hand, that's as full as your lungs ever ought to be. Now, you'll notice that in this process, there's never any sense of exaggeration. There's never a sense of tanking up and loading up. It's just staying in balance with yourself. But the interesting thing is that as you get to the top of that cycle, I'll come again, it's easy to make a sound. Ah. Ah. Ah, join me. You'll see how natural it is. Ah. 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 Now say ma 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 ma. Ma 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 ma. Ma 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 ma. Ma 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 ma. Time out. And you'll notice that there's no force to that. It just, as the air flows out of your lungs, it passes through your vocal folds. It's got enough energy in it so that it'll cause them to speak. Now, if you were to have somebody call at that energy level, everybody on the dance floor would fall sound asleep. So this isn't the end result. This is just trying to find the natural balance of the voice, okay? So, earlier today we used My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean. So that's what I want you to do with me. You're at a disadvantage, aren't you? You know that piece?
She's been here a long time.
Okay. So here we go. You're going to inhale. Do it a couple of times. Sing. My Bonnie lies over the ocean. My Bonnie lies over the sea. My Bonnie lies over the ocean. Oh, bring back thy Bonnie to me. You notice there's no problem with that. As a matter of fact, the phraseology in that song, it's about 5 seconds, 4.5 to 5 seconds. Somebody could get up out of bed in the morning and sing that phrase because there's no effort. It's not too long. Incidentally, most of the phrases that occur in singing calls are about that same duration. Music that comes from a folk or a popular idiom generally has very low demand in terms of the amount of phrasing that's required. However, every once in a while, for the purpose of styling, or if you got to sing a cue and then you got to do some patter instruction, choreography in between, you're left with no time to take the breath that you normally ought to breathe, and you can find yourself running out of breath. The truth of the matter is you can manage your breath and monitor it through the process. You'll notice that as we did this little activity, it was the same speed all the way through, right? Both in and out. But now watch what happens. My Bonnie lies over the ocean. My Bonnie lies over the sea. My Bonnie lies over the ocean. Oh, bring back my Bonnie to me. How do you think I did that? Did you see the speed at which my hand moved? So there's an externalization in your hand that sort of says that's how much breath I'm using, and you can monitor it. Now, I've watched you as you've been doing this, and some of you will go, my Bonnie lies over, and so you'll whoosh, and then have just fumes left over. Or, my Bonnie lies over the ocean. My Bonnie, so that the sense is your hand has a way of indicating what's actually going on the inside of your body. So if you're looking to find somebody to solve that problem, you can set up this pattern for them and then just watch what their hands do. And if their hands freeze, they've got the phrase started and then they don't have any more breath flowing. Or if they go all the way down to their navel before they have got a part way through, then they're wasting their breath from the beginning. So if you just saw what I did, now watch this. My Bonnie lies over the ocean. My Bonnie lies over the sea. My Bonnie lies over the ocean. Oh, bring back my Bonnie to me. Do you see how I managed that across the way? Why don't you guys join me, and we'll do 2 phrases at a time. And I want you to just feel the process by which that happens. So do a couple of these cadential things. In, exhale, breathe in, exhale. Now we'll sing. My Bonnie lies over the ocean. My Bonnie lies over the sea. My Bonnie lies over the ocean. Oh, bring back my Bonnie to me. I was pointing at a couple of you because you'd get here and then your hands would freeze in position and there was no more air moving, and so I was trying to draw your attention. It can move slowly, but it's got to keep moving. It is. That's a really good example. Okay, who's up for doing all 4 of them together? Let's give it. And you stop whenever you want to stop, right? If you have to catch one at the end of the 3rd phrase, there's no loss of life in that process. It's just a real okay thing. So here we go. My bonnie lies over the ocean, my bonnie lies over the sea, my bonnie lies over the ocean, oh, bring back my bonnie to me. So that got hard to do for some folks. But you also saw how there are elements in your own body when you think you're starting to run out of breath that panic. And you can feel it also. It just freezes up inside of you. And what you're trying to do is to convince the singers to not give in to that tendency, to not let it freeze up, but just keep the process moving. And there's always more air in there than you think there is. Where you can't get at it is when the muscles freeze up. Okay, so in that activity, we didn't measure the time. Somebody got a clock with a watch with a second hand on it? Okay, so let's see what happens. Ready? My bonnie lies over the ocean, my bonnie lies over the sea, my bonnie lies over the ocean, oh, bring back my bonnie to me. How long? See, that's way, way longer than you ever need. The point is that if you can get somebody to go up into the range of 15 to 18 seconds worth, then the fact that they have to sing for 6 seconds should never again bother them. You have such capacity that goes beyond the minimum requirement that never again do they have to be worried about it. So it doesn't really matter if you do this little parlor trick of having them make all 4 phrases in one, or whether you make them go just twice as long as they would normally go. That your objective is to help them get to the point where they don't have anxiety about running out of breath. Okay, so one of the things that's happening here as we're doing this little circular thing with our hand, I'm going to draw closer attention to it. And that is, you remember I commented that it's odd that I'd be pushing down with my hand at the very moment that I'm exhaling with my breath. The diaphragm muscle is a dome-shaped muscle that's right here at the bottom of the rib cage, and when it flexes downward. And its normal tendency is to flex down and relax up. Flex down and relax up. And it happens at the speed that we normally breathe. But it feels really peculiar when it breathes down and then it stays down. I'll show you what I mean. Would all of you inhale through your nostrils and watch what happens to the bottom of your rib cage? You can feel it stretches out. There's an expansion at the bottom of your ribs. Now just stay there. Just stay there. Just stay there. So you feel the panic starting to creep in there. That's your diaphragm saying, whoa, I'm not used to staying in this place. Let me breathe. It's a panic, and it's not real. It doesn't have to be given in. As a matter of fact, anybody that's going to be a singer has got to learn how to keep their diaphragm in a lowered position and not let it return to the high position. That has to be learned. It's not a normal condition to be there. But it's the tool by which you can make phrases last longer and longer. Those of you that made it through the 3rd phrase but just couldn't make it to the end of the 4th phrase, it was right in here that there was a kind of an implosion, a kind of a freezing up, and that was the point at which your diaphragm no longer could stay in that flexibly low position. So now what I want you to do is to take a breath through your nostrils. This is an extension of one more thing you can do. So take that stretching breath. You can feel the ligaments between your ribs stretch. Now just suspend it there. And try not to panic. And just leave it there, and then let it go. Now go back to that stretch place again. And suspend it. I use that word suspension because it implies no movement. You just stay right where you are. And let it go. And you try to elongate the length of time that you can do that. Now here's how you make the application to singing. Because when you do that low breath thing with your diaphragm staying low, that's the ticket to making your phrase last and not running out of breath. So here, take that stretch, take that inhalation, and we're going to sing My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean, but you're going to stay in that suspended place all the while, even at the moment of attack. So here we go. My bunny lies over the ocean. Time out. Go back to that stretch place. Sing. My bunny lies over the sea. Time out. Stretch into that suspension. Go. My bunny lies over the ocean. Time out and reestablish your breath. Oh, bring back my bunny to me. Now sit down for a second because we're going to converse a little bit about what you observed happening. So, then I've got the microphone here. Talk to me a little bit. What happened when you did that suspended breath thing? First of all, raise your hand if you were able to make that suspension stay all the way through the phrase. Raise your hand. Most all of you could. I expected some of you to say, my bunny lies over the ocean. My bunny, and there's a kind of a contraction that causes every time the pitch goes up. Did anybody feel that inclination? A little bit? That's one that you want to try to correct yourself, and that's something that you want to correct your callers from doing. Because there are two different ways that pitches are raised. Earlier, was it you that was asking about range extension, how to get a wider range? Somebody else that was raising that issue. And this is the heart and soul of that issue. There are two ways that pitches are raised. One of them, the most natural, the most God-given, and the one that none of us do very well, is that there is like a rubber band or a ligament on the inside of the edges of our vocal folds. It stretches outward long, and it stretches long. And when that happens, the vocal folds thin out, and as they thin out, pitch goes up. It's a very natural process, and it sounds like this. My bunny lies over the ocean. You heard it. There's no change of pressure at all. And that's just that stretching thing. Creates a kind of a sweet, sort of friendly quality, something that's kind of inviting for people to listen to. There's another alternative, and that is where you don't stretch the ligament in the appropriate way. You just leave it fixed at the front end and the back end in your throat, and then you add you give a blast of air, and as that happens, the vocal folds will respond to it by bowing upwards against the blast. And sure enough, in the bowing, they stretch. So the pitch goes up. But one of the characteristics of that is that the higher you go, the louder you have to sing, the more pressure there has to be. So you lose all sense of nuance in the music, and the louder, the high notes just have to be loud. And you know enough to know how graceful it is. Every once in a while, when somebody will go up to a high note and just kind of caress it or leave it floating there. And it's so magical that everybody just can't hardly believe that it had just happened. That's because there are so many people that use this other sort of breath-driven pitch-changing mechanism. And so you want to try to encourage people to get away from that and revert to the pitch-changing mechanism that was designed into us in the first place. How can you do that? Because you really can't control your vocal folds consciously. You can do it by making sure that you don't allow the breath to pressurize. And then you won't let the breath pressurize. Your body's determined that it's going to make that pitch. Nobody wants to be embarrassed by singing the wrong note, for heaven's sake.
So while you're practicing, your life will be flat line.
Actually, it'll only take 2 or 3 times. Because your body, it can respond to it very quickly. If you think, and that's the energy I've got, and I want to get to there, my bunny lies over the ocean, and there's just a little stretching sensation inside my body right in here that says I'm going from there to there. Think of it as a musical saw, and that's kind of the process that is at work. So anyway, that's one of the ways that you can help the beginning singer to figure that out. Okay, so now let's take the straw, and you can take it out of its sheath. There's a container of straws back there, Stephen. If you want to pick one up for yourself, it's right there. I gave you the paper so that you could make a spit wad. If you weren't happy at the end, you could throw them at me. All right, I got a big straw, so nobody give me any grief because I can shoot at you as easily as you can shoot at me. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what I want you to do is just No, up in the higher.
I got to break mine open.
You do.
It's locked up.
Oh, I pinched on it.
Yeah, mine was pinched.
Okay. So what I want you to do is to play a little bit with this straw, because as soon as you create this obstruction in the front, let me back up. I'm getting ahead of myself. The opening in your throat, in your trachea, is about 1 1/8 in diameter. How much of a diameter does your straw have? A couple of millimeters, 3 millimeters, 4 or 5 millimeters, maybe more than that. Maybe it's centimeters. You measure it in centimeters, but it's really small compared, right? So that means that you got this stream of breath coming out that hits an obstruction right at your lips. And just like all traffic jams, it can't get out. And so it creates what's called positive pressure on the inside of your whole vocal mechanism. Just singing this, and you can feel the pressure build, the air pressure increase all the way down into your lungs. Yeah. And what that does is it just inflates it. It just pops everything open. And in this condition, you can work with the vocal folds without ever doing them any harm. So if you're wanting somebody to warm up, you can go, and you can really engage the mechanism with an enormous amount of vigor, and it won't do any harm on the vocal folds. You've got somebody who's timid, who just want to make this kind of a sound. Well, you put the straw in their mouth and say, come on, really engage that. And you can do that safely by saying it's not going to hurt your vocal folds. So, and yeah, just really honk away at it. Really make a lot of noise. It won't make very much noise. Yeah. And you can experiment. And how many of you have a little trouble with unintentional yodeling on the upper part of your voice? Where you go, no. You don't want to do that. So this is a perfect way to figure that out without doing yourself any harm. Another one of those ideas about range extension. Now, that sounds really ugly. But watch what happens as soon as you take the straw. The straw is just to create a sense of passivity in the vocal folds. In this positive pressure environment, the vocal folds are no longer the tools of obstruction. Let me put that in a better way. The vocal folds very frequently serve both as vibrators and also gatekeepers to control how much the air is going to get out. So they stiffen when you start to get out of breath. So some of you that say your singers go flat as they start to run out of breath, it may not be that they're out of breath, it's that they think that they're out of breath, and so they stiffen up, and in the stiffening, then all of a sudden there's more resistance in the vocal fold, and the pitch just takes a nosedive, and they go flat. It's not because they're out of breath, but the response to what they think they're out of breath. So that's, again, a moment where the vocal folds have lost their passivity and have become gatekeepers to control the amount of breath exiting. But now, with this little straw, the monitor for the exit is right here at the lips now. So, in that sense, the vocal folds now are free to only do the task that they originally should have done, which is to just simply vibrate. Okay? And so they don't have that job of controlling the exit of air anymore. I mean, as long as the straw is around. So you go, Now, you see how that's a very unfriendly kind of non-human kind of a sound. But watch what happens as soon as I draw the straw out. I set the patterns of passivity in my vocal folds, and then I take the straw out and try to maintain the same sense of sensation in my throat and let real sound happen. So watch. Whoa, that's a lot of noise for so little work. And you see that as soon as you put the natural human resonance back into it, it makes way, way more noise at the level of the energy that you're putting into it. But in the straw, it doesn't do you any harm. You want to be in a hotel room and warm up? Nice little way to do it. Another way, I almost did it. Another way to do it is just take your pillow and hold it right to your face and sing hard into your pillow. And they won't be able to hear you into the next room, and if they could, they wouldn't know what it was anyway. They might think, oh. But the point is that this straw can be a real lifesaver in terms of reducing the amount of constriction and pressure that people put on their voices. It's a really nifty tool. It isn't the tool it isn't the only tool, however. The other opposing side of this is something that you can use called a free tone or a fry tone. And it is just simply, it's a gravelly tone. And that gravel comes from the fact that the vocal folds skip a vibration pattern. So they're touching half as many times as they normally would. And when you do that, all of the tension that's in the larynx and in the vocal folds has to subside. So, for your own sakes, when you're in the midst of a dance, about halfway through the dance, when you have a break, you should go off into some corner and just do a fry tone for about 30 to 40 seconds. There's tension that come into the voice as a result of the stretch of the vocal ligament. The vocal ligament can sort of get stretched out, and then it can't elastically return to its normal size. The people who suffer that characteristic are the ones who, the longer the night goes, the more they lose their low notes. Any of you like that? No? Then you may not have that problem.
Actually, you first showed that when you came here in the early 80s. And I found that if I'm having a lot of distress and feel like I'm losing the flexibility, if I do that, then I gain it back.
That's exactly right. Yeah. What happens is that there are some muscles built into the vocal folds. The heavy voice singers use those. Those are called the thyroarytenoid muscles. And when they get there, they get a little bit muscle bound, and then all of a sudden you can't stretch out into the high notes. On the contrast, there are some people who stretch into the high notes, and they get used to that. Those muscles are flexed, and they can't get access to the bottom of their voice anymore. And another thing that happens is that as people sing, their larynx loses its lower at-rest position and starts to climb higher and higher in the throat. And all three of those characteristics reduce the effectiveness of the singing. The fry tone returns all three of those characteristics to their at-rest place. And so about every hour or so, people who do a lot of voice usage would be wise to go back and do a fry tone to just reduce the amount of pressure that's associated with the singing. It accumulates over time without you ever really knowing that it's happening. And so if you'll just go back and do that, it'll be great for you. So as soon as you can teach your vocal folds to be more passive in the vibration pattern, two wonderful things happen. The range goes up and the range goes lower. When the vocal folds are free and released and not stiff, they can stretch farther than they normally would stretch, and they can relax into more relaxed positions than they otherwise would have been in. So a person who has a limitation on the range is held hostage by a certain behavior in the vocal folds that locks it into the range that they prefer, whether it's the high range or the low range. When they get locked into that range, then the muscles are free to transition to the other place. So, if you do this, you can stretch the vocal ligament out until it's very stretched out to its maximum. And when you do that, you have well over 3 octaves worth of range. We'll stop and think about that. That means not only could you sing any song that's in the repertory of CALLERLAB, the highest singers, you could sing their high notes. The lowest singers, you could sing their notes, almost. It's easier to stretch long than it is to shorten. But nevertheless, that's a tool that can be very, very useful in terms of extending your range. So you go, inside myself, that's just the puniest little sound coming out of this little straw. I open my mouth, and there's a lot more resonance into it that's as the result of the natural human tendency. If you go, ba, ba, you can sometimes stretch down a little bit lower as well. So we were talking about range being a limiting factor. The straw can be really, really useful to coaxing people into a higher range. If you find singers that have a tendency to clamp up in their throat when they're starting to go up for the high notes, two things you want to look at. One of them is, do they compress their breath? Can you see them squeezing at their ribs? If you do, then you say, no, keep that breath suspended. Then you'll see people going like this. They'll be stretching their head. They're sticking their chin out, trying to find some other way to get that pitch to rise. Put the straw back in their mouth. Don't let them sing the tune. Just that's when you get to that. You've heard that happen before, and all that is somebody who's in the wrong gear, gunning the engine and trying to drive on. You know what it feels like to be in second gear on the highway? It doesn't feel very good. The car starts to rattle a little bit, and the transmission gets broken. This is an automatic transmission system, folks, and if you set up the conditions right, those registers will just flip right on over for you without any stress at all. So you got somebody who's having trouble with the high notes, just make them sing with the straw in their mouth and sing through. Now, there's a nice side product that comes with the straw, and that is, all I'm doing is sticking my hand right in front of the straw, and I'm monitoring the stream of breath. Will you join with me? Sing She'll Be Coming Round the Mountain. I'm going to put it in the pitch range that I think will be discomforting for some of you on purpose. And all I'm interested in is that as you start singing, you'll feel a constancy, a stream on your breath. As you go up the scale, you may discover that all of a sudden the stream drops off. It's not because you're not pushing more breath through. It's because the vocal folds have stiffened up and the breath won't be allowed through. So you don't know that's happened. That's kind of part of your habit. But you can certainly monitor yourself by watching it with the straw. Let's try it. Let's see. I'm at the chorus. There we go. Put your hand in front so you can feel the... Okay, so as you did that, could you feel the variability of the stream on your hands? And as the higher you went, could you feel it want to drop off a little bit? If it didn't, then God bless you, you're in pretty good shape. But if it did, you're one of those folks where your vocal folds stiffen, and they stiffen in preparation for the old pattern where you stiffen and then you drive. And when you do that, sometimes for a short period of time you can get higher notes, but you can't do it for very long, and it makes you really, really tired. So, yes, that's exactly what happens. Your voice starts to go out when you're in the wrong register and it doesn't transition. Now, what's fun is you sing, come along with me, we're going to sing the same key that we were just in, and when you see me pull the straw out of mouth, you pull the straw out of your mouth too. Do you know these words at all? A little bit, okay. And I think you're going to be surprised because you'll sing along and it just sounds really awful with the straw. And then you open your mouth and there's more sound coming out than you ever thought that there should be. Ready? She'll be coming round the mountain, she'll be coming round the mountain, she'll be coming round the mountain when she comes. Now, for some of you, I could hear you want to choose to go to the bottom part of your voice, but you noticed that you didn't have to. You were singing up in a kind of a tenor-like range with great ease in your throat. And that's just a byproduct of the fact that your vocal folds are relaxed enough so that they'll allow themselves to be stretched into that place. In some respects, it's like an old guy like me trying to reach down and touch his toes. You know, the back muscles in my legs just sort of say, that's as far as you go. You're going to be lucky to touch your knees. Thank you very much. But if you just work at it, you can get to where you bend over and stretch and stretch and stretch, and pretty soon your hands are, well, maybe not pretty soon, but your hand will get to where you can lay them flat on the floor, and all that happens is that the boundaries that used to be there, you're not willing to accept, and you just stretch beyond those boundaries. So that's a really, really useful way, a useful tool, a cheap tool to help students in a number of ways. One of them is to pacify the vocal folds so that they don't work as hard. The second one is to relax the vocal folds so that their range can extend wider and lower. And then, what was the third one? Oh, you can open up the access to that range by singing with the straw in the mouth and that positive pressure that keeps the vocal folds passive, and then sneaking up on it by surprise and just pulling the straw out and asking them to sing at any given moment. You'll discover that this becomes a really, really useful tool for you in your teaching to overcome vocal resistances. Yes, John.
Here's a question. I understand the purpose of the straw, but how do we prepare the student to cut the straw? We just use a knife from a hotel or what?
Sure, I just used a cup. I just got straws and did a pair of scissors and snipped them off. You notice I got a full straw.
You can do it with scissors without screwing up the straw?
Well, yeah, that's right. Yours was a little pinched, but you saw it. Yeah.
My question would be, then what do you do to convince them that they can do that without the straw?
That's where it gets to be really fun. The straw is a little bit like Dumbo's feather. You think, as long as I got the straw in my hand, choke, and as soon as you take it away, you can't do it. But the truth of the matter is, you just go, coming down the mountain, coming round the mountain, went you, coming round the mountain, and you just go back and forth, weaning them away from that need, because what you're trying to do is to build a kinesthetic sense in their throat. Everybody knows what it feels like to have your throat constrict. And almost always the first sensation that happens is this startlement that the throat just remains passive as the pitches change. And so when you remove the obstruction, when you remove the positive pressure, what you're trying to do is to convince them that they can leave their vocal folds in the same posture that it was while they were in positive pressure. And another way that you can go about doing that is to not use a straw at all, but return your lips to the position as if it were holding a straw. Wah, 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 wah. And so this is just back and forth in an effort to try to convince the vocal folds to remain in their passive vibration pattern. Okay, let's put the straw down, and we're going to go back to the fritone. Because the fritone can also be really, really useful in extending range on the voice. And it's a startling experience. I'm going to demonstrate it, and then get one of you to demonstrate if you want to. So you start off, nice, easy, relaxed position, and you let that turn over into the comfortablest low note that you can sing, like this. That's for today. That's about my most comfortable low note. But then I'm going to start building pitches higher and higher based on the fritone. Remember what the purpose of the fritone is? It's to make your vocal folds the most passive that they can be. And how quickly you can move into very high ranges is significant. Another thing that the fritone does is that it causes the larynx to stay at its at-rest position. And there are many, many square dance callers. I can vouch for this fact because I've seen it for years. The higher they go, the higher their Adam's apple climbs in their throat. And as soon as it climbs high, they've lost some of the suppleness in the whole mechanism. And so there's this intellectual notion or image in your mind that high notes are here and low notes are here. The truth of the matter is the vocal folds don't know high or low. They know long and short. Long is high and short is low. And they're sitting crossways on your breath stream. So the whole image of high and low isn't a real experience for their vocal folds, even though it may be conceptually in our minds. So you start off there's 2 octaves, right drawn from the fritone position. Yeah, Stephen. He was saying that need to clear your throat, but if you do the fritone right, there's no press in it. You could hear noise, you could hear the phlegm rattling in there, but I wasn't fighting against that. It's just and it's right at that place between those 2 notes that most people will elevate their larynx as a tool to get into that higher range. But you don't have to. And so talking people out of the need to raise their larynx as a way of getting higher pitch is one of the ways that you can expand the range. So far what we've talked about is a way to pacify the throat by the use of both the straw and the fritone. And as you pacify the vocal folds, you'll discover that range will extend usually quite significantly upwards and sometimes lower. And then we talked about the natural cadence of your breath and trying to get in touch with that. One comment that I didn't make while we were doing that is that as you normally just breathe, it takes about the same length of time to inhale as it takes to exhale. But when you start to sing, it starts to become imbalanced, and the amount of time to exhale extends significantly, and the amount of time to inhale is shortened significantly. But if you follow the same natural patterns, the breathing, the inhalation especially, can become almost instantaneous. It can happen very, very quickly. It's when a singer compresses their breath and tries to drive their voice that they can't get a fast breath because they're out of balance with themselves. The system has clamped itself and is pushing against another system in the throat that's resisting. And before you can get a good breath, both of those systems have to let go. Then the breath can take place. Then the re-engagement. And those 3 tasks often are too many things to do in too short of a time. But if you don't ever fall out of balance with yourself, the amount of turnaround time it takes to take a completely full breath is minuscule. It's just measured in fractions of seconds. So that's something that I forgot to mention when we were going through that hand gesture activity. Okay, so we've talked about range extension. We've talked about simplifying the breathing, the phonation pattern. We've talked about ways that you can get in touch with your natural breathing rhythms. Then we also talked about the suspended breath, which is pretty unnatural. You kind of have to coax yourself into it. But as you get there, you discover that you can accomplish some really wonderful things. Are there some other issues that you'd like to talk about that have to do with singing as it relates to training callers?
If you notice that they are flat, is there a specific methodology we can use to get them up to pitch?
Yeah, you can get them to buy a push-up bra. Oh, you were talking about pitch. Sorry. Yeah, that's I'll just back up a little bit over here. Yeah, the problem with flatness to pitch generally is not because they hear poorly, but it has to do with an execution process, something between what they think they're conceiving to sing and what they actually sing. And it's almost always associated with too much stiffness in the vocal folds. So putting the straw back in their mouth will almost immediately correct the flaw. If you don't hear the correction, if you put the straw in a person's mouth, you get them to monitor their breath stream, and they're still singing low to pitch, that then probably is an indication that they're not very adept yet at being able to hear a pitch and to be able to reproduce it. No. Yes. Yes, same issue. Usually what happens is that the sharping of a song is too much pressure and too much resistance, and then every once in a while, from one day to the next, that procedure will change as our metabolism changes. And if we're really on, then we'll sing sharp. And if we're just a little bit weary, then we'll sing below pitch. And there's an indiscriminate shifting back and forth. There's also registers in the voice where a person can sing flat to pitch before the register shift, and then as the register shifts, there's some adjustment that goes on in the muscles of the vocal folds, and all of a sudden there's less resistance in the vocal folds, and all of a sudden it'll shoot way sharp. When they go up high, it'll have a tendency to shoot way sharp, and then in about 2/3 of the way up, it'll have a tendency to sing below pitch. And that's almost always a registrational problem. Okay, other issues that crop up for you from time to time, having to do with singing. You guys, I'm not talking about timing or choreography because that's your business, but having to do with singing. Are there other issues that arise that come to your attention?
What about posture?
Yeah, standing up is better than lying down. Good. But the truth of the matter is, the way that it matters is that when a person has poor posture and they have to stand on the podium for an extended period of time, then their body gets weary because it's being held out of balance. All of you stand up for a second, if you will, please. I'd like to ask you to roll forward onto the balls of your feet and then back and forth to the heels of your feet and back and forth, and you'll find yourself rolling out of balance, in balance, and out of balance. And then, just like a pendulum, I want you to rock back and forth until you find yourself gravitationally balanced. And you may discover that that's a different position than you sometimes allow yourself to stand in. And so just run yourself a little forward on the axis. Now look at the muscles that have to tense up to hold you from tipping over. Now roll back behind out of axis. And look at the muscles that have to work to keep you from tipping over. Those muscles get tired. And so if you find yourself perpetually standing either forward of center, which is what many people do, particularly people that are sort of in the limelight or are assertive kind of people. They'll have the tendency to always be standing forward, and all of a sudden the muscles of their buttocks and hips and their legs and the low part of their back will become really, really weary because of something that they're not even aware that's happening. When the right answer is to find that gravitational center and hold on to it. Within that boundary, another issue of posture is that sometimes people will stand in such a way so that their back is swayed, or that their head is forward on their shoulders, and each one of those kind of misbehaviors also make muscles work more than they ought to. Your head weighs about 40 pounds. Nice to get it balanced gravitationally on your shoulders, because if it stands forward of that center, then the muscles in the back of your neck down through your shoulders to the scapula are always perpetually drawn. If you are that kind of a person, you will chronically have neck tension, upper shoulder tension. You may have headaches at the back of your skull, mostly due to the fact that there's not blood flow up there because the muscles are chronically stiff. And if you line that up right, those things will go away and the headaches will subside and the back tension will subside, and that'll be a wonderful reward for the change in the posture that you make. Your ears, the center lobe of your ear, the opening of your ear should line up right across the top of your shoulder points. And most people stand with their ears about an inch or an inch and a half, maybe 2 inches forward on their shoulders. The other part of that equation that makes it hard is that most people stand with their shoulders drawn just a little bit. That becomes impossible to get your ears all the way back there. So by releasing the tension in your shoulders, you can find that alignment that will remove the tension. Now this has some really significant benefits as it relates to singing, because when you find your posture just right, the trajectory of the larynx up through the trachea up through the larynx makes it such that there's no impediment, no crimping that goes on in the vocal tract. The vocal folds can make very natural and easy vibration patterns. When you get a position where a person's head is thrust forward, then it throws that out of alignment and becomes very acoustically inefficient. So there's some benefit that's associated with that. there are some ligaments and some muscles that are attached to the top of the larynx that attach to the mastoid process, the little bony promontory behind your ear. And if your head is collapsed forward, then the distance from there to your larynx is shortened, and those muscles are lax, and the larynx has a tendency to sag forward and crimp on itself. You put yourself in the correct posture, and then all of a sudden, those alignments are such so the larynx is held in its proper position. So that's a second part of the thing where posture can be a third of a help. The third one has to do with the relationship in the small of your back. And this can be the very most difficult to solve and also the most painful. People who carry tension in the lower part of their back most frequently have some problems with a misalignment in their hips. So the right alignment should be the ears over the shoulders. The yoke of the shoulders should sit gravitationally over the girdle of the hips. The hips should stand directly over the knees, and the knees should stand directly over the middle of the ankle. Gravitationally, that's the right position to be in. I bet there isn't a person in this room that stands that way. All of us are a little offline and have learned how to do it for who knows why reasons. Imitating the people that were our parents or our mentors or our models, we just pick up behaviors that are not all that useful to us. There is a third way to go about this, and that is to imagine that you have an oval at your pelvis, which if you think about the bony structures, it is an oval. And you take that oval, and there's another oval at the bottom of your rib cage. Now, for me, that's the place where I have the greatest trouble lining those two ovals up. The one should stand right over the top of the other one. And mine has a tendency to stand in front of because of my natural swaybackness. So you get those two lined up. Then the next alignment is right here at the clavicles and the scapula. That creates a sort of collapsed oval. And you set those on top. And then the base of your skull is another oval. And you get those standing on top of each other. And all of a sudden I feel weightless. You know, the muscle tensions that have been there to help me stand erect now no longer have to behave. They don't have to be active. And all of a sudden I'm just as easy as you could ever please. So go ahead and have a seat. So posture, you can see, has a bearing on this. Incidentally, that issue about the alignment of your posture as it relates to your diaphragm, if you have the tendency toward the rib cage being thrust forward, whenever you take a breath, the breath will come down and out in front of you almost like a kind of a shortened pregnancy. It just sticks way out in front. If, however, you get yourself lined up properly, when the diaphragm breathes, it goes right straight down and you feel like you're standing, singing, right on top of a big column of air. And it is so easily efficient in its delivery. That's probably more detail than you'd want to go into with your callers, unless somebody has an exaggerated problem. You don't want to draw their attention to too many different kind of facets at once. And changing a person's posture is really, really hard. You've been standing that way for all of your life. Let's ask, are there other issues that can come up that might be of importance to you? Nobody has mentioned it yet. I want to make sure anybody has a chance to ask it. There is a point of efficiency in the voice that I think is worthy of being discussed. When you have too little airflow or too little resistance in the vocal folds, you get an inefficient quality of sound. It has to do with this. It's nice and warm, and it doesn't have very much projection to it, and it doesn't have very much command in it. That isn't a very efficient way to sing or to speak. And it's definitely not a good place for a square dance caller to be because it invites anarchy. So most of the square dance callers that I know have a tendency to press their voices in order to get a little bit more command into the sound and put a little brighter, forceful delivery to it. But the right answer is neither of those two alternatives. They're both indicative of an imbalance in the body. When you get the air speed moving at the right, speed, and you have sufficient passivity in the vocal mechanism, and you get those in balance, you'll hit a point that I called a point of efficiency or a threshold of efficiency. And you can hear it happen in my voice. I start out inefficient. Right there is the point of efficiency. And below that, I didn't have enough air flowing. And so the vocal folds wouldn't close all the way, and so there was breath leaking. So if I can find where that point is and just track it all the time, there's a very distinctive sensation that's associated with singing on threshold. There's also a very distinctive sonority associated with it. It is at the same time warm and dark and bright and penetrating. That has a name that we draw from classical art called chiaroscuro, meaning bright and dark at the same time. There it is. And it doesn't have to be a baritonal sound. It can be a tenor sound or a woman sound, but there's a point where that efficiency starts to occur. And if you can help your singers to find that place, she'll be coming round the mountain when she comes. She'll be coming round the mountain when she comes. She'll be coming round the mountain. All I'm doing as I sing is using my internal gyroscope monitoring system that tells me where that threshold is. And it is always a relationship between the amount of resistance in the vocal folds and the amount of flow of air. And no one of us in this room will monitor it exactly the same way. There's a range of acceptability, and within that range of acceptability, there is individuality completely free all the way across. And so you don't want to try to force somebody to be somebody else. You let them be where they are, but you can always tell when they hit that point of efficiency. Can you, as you listen to me sing, can you listen for characteristics that help you know when I'm in that? I'm going to give you some examples. She'll be coming round the mountain when she comes. She'll be coming round the mountain when she comes. Threshold?
No.
What's wrong?
It sounds tight.
Exactly. It's very bright, but it's very tight. And bright and tight go hand in hand. But everybody wants bright. Oh, that's a problem. How about this? She'll be coming round the mountain when she comes. She'll be coming round the mountain when she comes. She'll be coming round the mountain. What about it? Threshold? Yeah, exactly so. This is the Garrison Keillor voice. It's nice and warm and mellifluous, but it doesn't have any core in it. It doesn't have a clarity to it. So that's the warm side. The other one is the bright side. And neither one of them is the right balance. She'll be coming round the mountain when she comes. She'll be coming round the mountain when she comes. She'll be coming round the mountain. Got it? Because it had both bright and dark. It had both characters in it. And the dark creates, or the warmth of the sound, creates a kind of a friendly, accessible quality that if I sing bright and tight, it sounds edgy and unfriendly and nervous and or anxious. And that tone of voice can carry over to the dancers in a very, very immediate kind of way to cause them to say, I don't like that voice, or that person is shrill, or that person is mean, or that person got up on the wrong side of the bed today. And it's not true, but it can certainly perceive to be that way.
You were talking about the pressed voice for emphasis. How do you deal, or how could we deal with people who are basically, they're emphasizing so much that they're shouting as they're singing?
The easiest solution to that one, it requires pressure in the breath in order for that to happen. And so if you can go back to the notion of a suspended breath, you can't push breath as long as it stays in that low diaphragmatic position. So that's the way that you can stop it even before they know that they've started it. Once you allow the contraction, then it's Nellie bar the door, and everybody else, they'll go to the pattern that they've had before. So this low, expanded, suspended breath is the single most significant tool you can use to reduce the amount of pressurization on the voice. In the short term, people will have to figure out how to get to the pitches without the pressurization, but it really is a matter of just a few repetitions, not months and months of repetition. Now, it may take months and months of repetition before they really believe you, but they'll be able to execute it straight off, within the same session. John? Can you have a warm and fuzzy and still be bright? No, you can't. Unless you find this threshold or this balance that I'm talking about. When you hit that balance, the vocal folds are very passive, which creates a nice, easy warmth. But it also captures a high frequency that's built into the natural tone that will emerge through no fault of your own or no personal intention of your own. It just happens when you hit that fully efficient place. And so it springs to life quite spontaneously when you get the underlying conditions to balance out right. So if I sing, she'll be coming round the mountain, the primary characteristic that you're catching out of that is what? She'll be coming round the mountain. What's the characteristic that sticks out to you the most? It really penetrates, doesn't it? But it doesn't create a sense of tension or force associated with it. She'll be coming round the mountain. That has some tension in it. That has some force, some determinancy. She'll be coming round the mountain. You can hear it, the shift in sonority, right? Okay, so what do you do if you want the song to be more twangy? Because who wants to have a square dance caller sing like me? That's not the sound that you want. You want a little bit more of a natural folk-like quality. A kind of a country twang, and certain numbers are required. How do you do that? The position of your tongue in your mouth is the primary tool that's available to you. If you bring your tongue more forward in your mouth, you will get a brighter sound. It has nothing to do with the pressing in the vocal folds. It has to do with the presence of the vibration patterns and how they're enhanced in the mouth. So if I want to sing, she'll be coming round the mountain when she comes. She'll be coming round the mountains when she comes. She'll be coming round the mountain. You can hear there's still that threshold in there. They're still bright and dark, but there's a decidedly bright, brash quality to that. If I wanted to sing New York, New York, I wouldn't want to use that sound. I'd want more of this kind of a sound. And that's a question of where the tongue sits front or back in the mouth. So if you were to, something like Ghost Riders in the Sky, or some of those things that are sort of big and grand in their nature, then you'll want something that's a little bit more balanced than that brighter sound. So how are we doing time-wise? You guys are about ready to die off. Yeah, it's late in the afternoon. You all have had a couple of days and it's starting to wear on you. If you were to form your hands, I know, heavens to, yeah. Okay, before we go anywhere else, are there questions that you all want to ask in follow-up to anything that we've talked about here today? Because you're trying to find ready tools that you can use to diagnose and solve problems. What things can you look for with your eyes that might tell you that somebody is doing something wrong? Posture is several. There are several parts to that posture. One of them is this, where the chin thrusts forward the higher they go in the range. That's a dead giveaway that they've got the wrong kind of production going on in their throat. You get them to stand properly. Don't let them thrust their head. Don't let them short the muscles in the back of their neck, and make them figure out how to sing in that position.
This, as opposed to this, then I know that I've got a breathing problem.
That's exactly right. You see them pumping their shoulders as compared to using the lower bellows position. That's another visual cue. What are some other visual cues that you can turn to? Well, that may also be true, and that's a solution that is very frequently brought forward by entertainers like yourselves or other fields of entertainment, that if you have an animated face, your voice will have a tendency to be animated, and if you have a dullard's face, then the tone will have a tendency to be dull along the way. So animation can be measured by the semi-smile that you keep on your face. It can be measured by the twinkle or the absence of twinkle in the eye, the alertness in the eye, as compared to a person who's got their eyes rolled inward, sort of watching themselves or scrolling the words across the inside of their eyelids. You can see when somebody's not really in the moment. Those are visual cues that you can use that have to do with the place of their mind. Incidentally, that smile, that sort of raising of the cheekbones that sort of says, hey, I'm pretty happy, has a very, very important healthy effect on the inside of your mouth, particularly on the soft palate. If the soft palate gets low, you get this kind of a sound. It's really kind of dull and kind of twangy and nasal. But if you get the soft palate up, it sounds lively. It helps the resonances a lot. So that externalized inner smile can help solve that problem while you're at it. What are some of the cues you can turn to that are, there's still some more physical cues. When somebody sings, look for tics in their behavior. When you see them follow with a similar kind of tic on a regular basis, so that they go to their high notes and their head sort of draws to the right side, or they tuck their chin, or they do anything abnormal, squint their eyes, wrinkle their forehead, you can see that what's happening is that they're entering into an area of anxiety. And the externalization of that anxiety, if you can catch the anxiety, you can often name it, and if you can name it, you can solve it. But you have to draw their attention to it because they've been doing it for so long that they don't know that they're really doing that anymore. What are some auditory cues that you can turn to in diagnosing problems? And what do those auditory signals tell you? When you hear something, a quiver, I thought of something else. When you can hear a pulse, when you've got somebody with a vibrato that has a pulse in it, you know that there's an imbalance. Or a quaver in the voice, that's an indication of instability. What are some other things that you can listen for?
Well, even I find that there are people that think that that's the goal of their singing, so they try to imitate a vibrato, and so they stretch their neck out and try to force that into the voice.
Yeah, I think that all of those things are pretty destructive. I once had a seminar. I've done some pretty extensive research in vibrato and where it comes from and why we have it in our voice, and basically it's a byproduct of intensity. The right kind of vibrato will show up when you get the right balance in your body and you sing with the right kind of engagement, the degree of intensity. Because all it is a tremor of muscles flexing and then releasing. And in the releasing, the blood flows back into the capillaries, and when it flexes, then the pitch rises, and when it relaxes, the pitch undulates. But it undulates in a very narrow band that's acceptable, and when that band starts to get wider and wider, it becomes unattractive to the rest of our ears. But people can try to make a vibrato by waggling their tongue, waggling their jaw, or pulsing their breath, all of which are artificial and not very attractive. So those are auditory cues, the cues of vibrato. If the vibrato has an easy undulation in it, it's probably a signal that it's on the right track. If it has a chop in it, that's an indication that there's too much pressure. A vibrato that's too fast means that there's some sort of tension in the area above the larynx, and if it's a slow vibrato, it's having primarily to do with something having to do with the breathing system. Okay, any other auditory cues? Edginess, tension. Those are auditory cues. When the sound is bright but tight, that's a dead giveaway that there's something wrong. And if it's bright and tight, the solution is to make it not so tight. And you've got some tools. You've got a straw, you've got a fritone that can release the pressures that are associated there. If a tone is characterless or non-projected, that's right. That could be another indication of. That's an indication that there is insufficient breath going along to motivate it, to keep it generated. Your vocal system is a generator that produces the breath that activates the vocal folds, and if the breath isn't flowing with sufficient vigor, the vocal folds won't vibrate. Or they'll have to tense up to make do with the little amount of air that's flowing, neither one of which are good solutions. Okay, I think we're done for the day. I appreciate your attention here. It's been a challenging session. It's hard to stay focused.
Is there such a thing as a natural vibrato that somebody would have? They can't sing without that thing shaking and rattling and rolling, you know?
It's always vibrato is a learned tremor. It's always a learned tremor. But some people who sing come to that natural balance quickly, and so therefore it's a byproduct. And they don't know otherwise. But there isn't a single person that I know who, when asked, can not take the vibrato out and put it back in, almost at will. Stephen? Willie Nelson as a straight tone, you mean, or? He does have a different kind of a sound, but he can take his and take it out at will. For him, vibrato is an ornament; it's not a necessity.
Now, I don't know if this is in the scope of this vocal deal, but I like, for some reason or other, I can't enunciate the syllables quickly like auctioneer type. So.
I know we're out of time, so I'll just quickly touch on that, and then for another time maybe we'll have to address it. There are lots and lots of tensions that creep into a person's tongue. The Apostle Paul was right when he named the tongue as the unruly member in the body, because it's actually a combination of 7 muscles that are intertwined with each other. It's nothing like it else in our body. And as a result of that, tensions can accumulate in the tongue, and the tongue can think that it has more jobs to do than it really should. As you go up through the range, it can sense when there's an instability, when there's about to be a register shift, and if you don't know otherwise, it will stiffen down in an effort to try to create stability in the larynx. And as it does so, it will create some stability, but it'll also make some tension and some imbalance in the system. But one of the dead giveaways in that system, when that's the case, is that during the time that the tongue is drawn back and stiffened to stabilize the larynx, you can't understand the words of the people that are speaking, the person, because the tongue, which should be facile and quick to move from place to place, has now another job that it's doing that impedes its ability to move quickly around the mouth to create the different consonants and vowels that are required, because it's now stiff at its base to stabilize the larynx. And one of the dead giveaways of a stiff tongue base is the inability to articulate quickly, to be able to speak patter words in a clear and understandable fashion.
Is that not also a function of the lips and how you articulate distinctly between them and the tongue?
The question is it also a function of the lips? It's primarily the tongue. The flaccidness of the lips, a laziness of the lips, an unwillingness to finish the shaping of the vowel can also be a very, very strong characteristic of Americans. It's rarely that case for Europeans. They use their lips more than we do. I don't know. I don't understand. We have more children than they do, but they use their lips more, so I don't know. At any rate, my point is that you see, when you see Americans who age, what you see are jowls. You rarely see that kind of jowl behavior in Europeans, particularly in the French, who are busy shaping their lips in rounded positions all the time. What you do is see are all kinds of little wrinkles along the mouths. You see old women, old European women, and they have crinkly lips, but they very rarely have jowls. And Americans have jowls because our lip shaping, the muscles that shape our lips, are very unused.
Is that why the trilling of the R occurs more in European languages than it will in America? I find that Americans always have a hard time doing that and learning a European language.
That is a characteristic, whether it's the rolling at the front or the rolling at the back. Those characteristics, you have to learn how to do it. And the people who learn those languages at birth developed a facility to do that thing. that somebody that comes to it later has to work at. But my point that I wanted to drive home was that one of the auditory cues of tongue tension is the inability to understand their words, that the vowels get garbled and the consonants are late.
Is there an exercise or a way to help people relax their tongue?
Yes, there are things that you can do. One of the things is to try to stick your tongue out and touch your chin and the tip of your nose. And there are colleagues of mine who will stick their tongue out and they stretch out the base of the tongue, stretch the base of the tongue out, and then after they get the opening in the throat, then they let the tongue return where it belongs. Yeah.
I have a question just for European callers. Lots of my students have problems with the right and left through, because saying this in 2 beats. And I think one of them has to do with articulation. I'm not sure what you have ideas.
I definitely think it's the same thing, that if a person is facile with their articulators, right and left through is no problem. If you're... That's a part of it. But also there's those people that try to do everything just so. The right and left through, the over-articulation just gets in the way. So if you just go right and left through, you just don't have to over-articulate. We need to stop. Looks like some other things going on. Thanks for your attention.